he called the next day. So let me just say this, that your money will be well spent. He'd already made arrangements, I guess. I don't know. So I said, okay. And I came back, and it was a Saturday night, and it was snowing again. I mean, terrible condition. And I knew the two other fellows. I knew of them. And ironically, as it turned out, the fellow I teach with out at West Pines was one of the Charlie Smith was pro Deliria at Spring Valley. Yeah, but he finished third. But it was, I wasn't really that interested in it. So he called me and said, well, you've got it.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. And then I met with the board and went through the whole facility.
Right.
And so I drove up here the 1st of March in that 65 with 3 kids and a trailer.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Nowhere to stay.
Yes. Where did you stay?
We stayed at a motel. Actually, we stayed at a motel in Fairview Park.
On Lorraine Road.
Yep,
probably.
Lorraine Road.
Right.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
And so after, it was hard to deal with an 11-month-old and a 2-year-old, and so Mr. Wasmer's son, Jack was the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
And I had given Mr. Wasmer and Jim Dorncott lessons down there, his son-in-law. And so he said, George Wasmer was the youngest of all the boys of his family. They lived in near Mastic Woods over on,
Oh, yeah.
and so he called me, gave me his number, and he said, come on, you're going to stay with us till you can find an apartment. So we stayed 3 weeks with George and Mary Lou Wasmer.
Isn't that
They were so gracious.
Yeah.
God, it was such a help. And so the Wasmers had a lot to do with it. Yeah.
wonderful? Again, class
Yeah,
goes with the game.
it sure does. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he donated the school, the Wasmer Field, the practice field of it.
Is that right?
Ignatius?
Oh yes, right. Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a great guy. And you know, a lot of funny things happened, and you see so many things that I was reminded of every kind of little, like every city has a story to tell every night, but there are just hundreds and thousands of stories about this place. Remember the jet plane invasion?
Yes.
Kordis and Bachorous?
Yes.
Oh my
flying
God.
over it. Yeah. Tell us about that.
That was the funniest thing I've ever. His wife Elaine, Pate Bachorous was a star football player at University of Illinois,
Right.
and they played in the Rose Bowl in '51.
Okay, I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
yeah. And he was well established in the distribution of sporting goods business. I think he was the first franchiser of Puma Sporting Goods, excuse me, in this country. And he was in the Air National Guard, and they would go to Mansfield, and Kordis was a manufacturer's rep from a place in Pittsburgh, and big guy, 6'5", and both were big guys.
I know.
It's so. They said we're gonna make a visit to Lakewood. I had gone to some kind of a function, a real formal dance that their air wing had over the holidays, and they were, of course, after a couple of drinks, we got it all fixed. I didn't know what he was talking about. Well, on a Friday morning, every Friday, I had a ladies beginners class, 10 or 12 ladies, for about 6 weeks. And this was the first class, the date they had picked. His wife was in my class. And I heard this funny sound, and I saw these two, like Tora, and I said, oh my God, here they come. And they almost hit the treetops, and they blew the afterburners right over the range.
Yeah, all right.
Those poor ladies all just took off, ran to the ladies' room, and she said, Mrs. Backer says, "I'll kill you if you ever tell anybody that was my husband." They didn't know. None of these gals knew he was a flyer.
Right. I know they got in trouble. Somebody picked up the numbers of something, and when they got back, they got told about it.
They did it again.
I didn't know they did it.
Oh, on a mixed, they didn't like the mixed couples, okay?
On Sundays.
They had to wait one day to get a tea time or something because we had set times for the mixed couples. So it was like around 2 o'clock, yeah. So we started at 11:30, or around 2:30 actually. It was 3 hours in it. So the first group was already on the 16th tee. Dr. Ross and Mrs. Ross and Irvin Elner Lahaney. And they can't, and I was over here by the ninth on the putting green. I saw him coming again. I said, oh my God, here it is again. It was packed. Every hole was taken. The range was packed. And here he, and you could see him in there just grinning up the storm when they passed over the ninth green, and they blew the burners right over 16 green. And this poor lady, she, Mrs. Lahaney, of course, she sued him later.
Did she?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Said it caused her to have a heart palpitation and a terrible heart condition.
Excuse me.
But those golf carts, when we had those, we didn't get a fleet of carts till '69 when Mr. Marino was president, and he said they were Harley Davidson, gas powered.
Yes.
And we didn't get, we had no place to put them, to house them. So we were out right behind the 17th tee, the grinder there, and we devised an alarm system, a chain, ropes going through the tiller bars and all that. Well, we had 36 of them. Okay, they were in such demand because we didn't have caddies all year. Now, and the board decided, well, if the first priority for a cart would be a medical exemption. And so the first meeting I had on file in my office, they had to send to me a letter from the doctor and to certify they had a condition that warranted use of a cart. And I said, yeah, I didn't know there were that many sick people here. We had 150 letters, you know. So I said, who do you, I mean, what condition is worse than the other one? Heart or whatever? So I said, there was no way to tell, only by the order of calling for a cart reservation. You know, they had to call and reserve a cart for a given time. That was tough. That was really tough.
It's like worse than scheduling the tee times.
Yeah, and then to say who gets one in before Agnes gets one, and so on. You know.
Oh my goodness.
And this lady, Mrs. Benz, she always had real troubles when it came. She got real faint when she couldn't get a cart. You know. Oh God.
Apropos.
Yeah.
Timing. Good.
Yeah, there were a lot of cases, and one of the kids, one of the caddies, he was a regular, and we kind of had a rule. In general, although I lived in Bay Village for 32 years, in general, our kind of a concept was we don't hire caddies from Bay Village because they're not very good workers. They don't have to work.
That's right.
Really, it was that simple. They didn't make good caddies generally. Kids from North Ridgeville and North Olmsted and Westlake, you know, and Lyria, if we could get them. So I said, I had hired a few to work in the bag room, boys from Bay Village and so on.
Right.
And then of course a lot of the members lived in Bay Village. Some in particular who didn't care much for my operation, but it was a tough deal. And I said, we don't discriminate really. They just don't qualify. You can't depend on them.
Yeah.
That's what my experience was. Well, one boy from Elyria he and his buddy, very good. They were first ones here, and it was a question of priority, numbers, who gets called first, and so we had a lot of early play every day. So he said, There was a fellow named Jack Roos, who was a real steady player, a good friend of Sendelar's. And he said, of course, they're all deceased now, but he drove a Cadillac, a white Cadillac. And he was the first one to park on what we call Cadillac Row, and the first one at the entrance. And Mr. Roos was quite frugal. And he said, and this kid, he got stuck with him 3 times in a row. And he just got through about 11:30. They were first off after Merrick and Marquardt and that bunch. So he'd leave his keys on the front seat. Most of them would. So this kid said, I'll fix him. So he drove off in his car. And he's driving around Elyria and Sheffield Lake, showing off to his girlfriends. He was just turned 18. And, no, he was 17, wasn't 18. And he's thrilling everybody with this new Cadillac driving around. He thought he would hit the lottery or something. So, of course, 3 days later, they picked him up. The police found out. And they called me, and I said, yeah, he was one of our regulars. And he said, we're going to give him a choice. And he was a nice kid, well-mannered. And here's the option. We're going to you can either go to jail for 3 years or go to the Marine Corps for 4. So the judge says, he said, I'll take the Marine Corps. And he came back later. He was all sharp with his uniform. Oh, yeah. But a lot of strange, funny things happened. Yeah.
What was the most unusual thing that you could think of?
Oh, God. Well, one was that it wasn't that long before I left. It was the invitational dinner dance. You know, that was a big deal. And of course, most of them did have caddies. You know, we had that's the middle of July, and we had just gotten a new caddy master. The caddy house was all fixed up well, and I had Mike Masterson was one of my assistants, and Bill Baker, and we were finishing up all the details of determining the winners and the lines and everything, so they could announce them. Right. And we took the results upstairs to whoever the chairman was, and everybody's having a good time and having a few drinks. It's like 9 o'clock, 9:30 almost, and hot, and the air conditioning unit broke down this upstairs. And this doesn't cross ventilation. No,
windows don't open.
And so they opened those portico windows on the doors.
Right.
So I was just getting ready to go through the breezeway to go to my car, and I heard this terrible commotion coming from the caddy house. Raucous laughter and yelling and screaming, and half the caddies were over there drunk. They had confiscated a keg somehow, and some of them were 14 years old. And so Mike and I jumped in the cart, ran over there. And one of the members called the pro shop and wanted to know what was going on. I said, well, we'll check it out. It was really embarrassing. And you could hear it up here, of course. Yeah. And so we had to make sure that we called the parents to pick them up, you know. Yeah. And the assistant caddy master was one of the most popular kids that ever caddied here, and he was later. He was the youngest of the famous Ginley brothers. Remember the Ginley brothers? Oh, they were all favorites from St. Ignatius. Okay. Good athletes, and you know, everybody wanted the Ginleys to caddy for them. Right. But the smallest Ginley, he fell victim to that. I mean, he was part of it. He was selling them beer.
He's an entrepreneur.
Oh, God. I said, you're going to get us all fired.
You mentioned a couple of assistants. Any of note that you developed or trained over the years?
Well, yeah, it's an excellent question, because my first assistant two. One is one of the top 20 teachers in the country, John Elliott. You see him featured in Golf magazine. He has a feature. He has about every 3 weeks in Golf Sports Illustrated, the Golf Plus section. John's a good teacher.
I've seen that name, yes.
And he was a good player, and he started, when I first went real quickly in 1957, I didn't know Mrs. Jones, Robert Trent Jones' wife, was named Ione, and she called me, she says, now that you've taken this over, we want to have a good junior golf program. We don't care if they become real good, or we just want to get all of our kids exposed to junior golf program. So it was 58 we started that. And out of that group, John Elliott was 11 at that time, and Bob Barbarossa, Rick Stockton, Dickie Lyle, and quite a few other good players later became champions, came out of that group. And so in 63, we had 6 kids in that group that started as raw little recruits, and at 11 years old could break 70 on a par 72 course that was 7,300 yards. They were 15 years old. They were good. They so that fall that they had the they had the tournament in the spring, the high school championship, and Barbarossa was the best player I had ever seen as a junior player. And he won the NCAA later at the University of Houston. He should have stayed a pro. He was just that good. And John Elliott, of course, number 2. And Billy Harris had a swing as good as Sam Snead looked like, and on and on. And so we went to the tournament, the state tournament at Port St. Lucie, and they won by 25 strokes gross. There was no contest. It was a runaway.
Wow.
And in fact, coincidentally, about a year ago, or earlier, in this in February, they had a feature on Gary Koch, who was an announcer for the ESPN and the Golf Channel. Tampa had up in the in the early 70s. They had a high school team. They said this was the best high school team in history. And they showed that Eddie Pierce and all of it. Well, they weren't. My team was. The next year, they won by 30 strokes. Gross. And they had a lot of good teams in Florida. I mean, they played all year. Got it. Yeah. And so that was about the. And so I've had, and then Barbarossa won the high school championship, and the NCAA later. And the funny thing was, his dad was a contractor in Minnesota, and he did not interfere with, except one day he came to me, and Lou and I were standing there at Worsham. Lou didn't teach much, but he was a wonderful teacher. And he said, this is Bobby was about 13 then. He was becoming a really good ball striker, and he said, you know, I think, watching my son, I think his swing is too flat. I want Lou to give him a few lessons. Okay, I said, it's all right with me. I'm not a guru. And he says, and so Lou, after a couple lessons, he says, I can't figure it out. I can't figure out how he can hit the ball so well and with that flat a swing. I said, because he's only 5'6". He's got to have a flat swing, but his club's not closed, and so on.